Welcome back to CNN Newsroom. You are joining us live from Seoul, where US President Donald Trump had lunch with US and South Korean troops ahead of a meeting with his South Korean counterpart. We are looking at live pictures now, the pomp and ceremony taking place outside the Blue House, where President Trump's motorcade is slowly making its way to the Blue House, situated behind us. That is where, of course, President Trump will be meeting with President Moon Jae-in, where North Korea is definitely at the top of the agenda. President Moon, since he has been in office for the past 6 months, has wanted dialogue with North Korea, something that has frustrated Donald Trump. So it will be interesting to see how they can mend a strained relationship. Moon and Trump perhaps don't see eye to eye, but certainly this alliance is some 67 years old. And as we have heard earlier, the alliance is bigger than any individual. Now, where we are located here on the streets of Seoul, you can see thousands of police, and they have been here manning what have been peaceful protests. And we know that demonstrators certainly were protesting outside of Camp Humphreys, where President Trump met with US troops. That, of course, is the largest US base here in South Korea. Now, his harsh rhetoric on the north has raised anxiety on the Korean Peninsula. Now, to discuss this, let's join our Paula Hancocks, who is also here in Seoul. Paula, you have covered this country extensively, and I know that you have spoken to President Moon, and I want to get to that shortly. We're also joined by Philip Yun in San Francisco, and he's the Executive Director and COO of the Plowshares Fund, which aims to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. Great to have you both with us. Paula, if I can get back to you. We know that President Moon has a very different outlook on North Korea from President Trump. How do these two men in this bilateral that is about to take place, how do they find a middle ground?
Well, Anna, it's interesting. We've seen the policy of President Moon Jae-in shift slightly over recent months, probably in no small measure because of the intense nuclear and missile testing from Pyongyang, but also presumably because he would like to be on the same page as the United States. The alliance, as you say, is very strong. It's bigger than any one or two presidents. So certainly he wants to be allied with the United States. So we know that we've seen more of a push towards sanctions and pressure. But what President Moon Jae-in has been saying, and what he said to me when I spoke to him a couple of months ago, was the reason for this, the end goal was to talk to North Korea. He wanted to have these sanctions and this pressure in order to pressure Pyongyang to sit down at the negotiating table. That is his ultimate goal. He wants more engagement. He wants more dialogue. He wants the inter-Korean relationship to improve, and he's been very clear about that. He campaigned on that ticket, and that's part of what brought him into power here in South Korea. Now, it's not always been welcomed by the US president. A recent tweet from Donald Trump said that he was effectively appeasing North Korea, not a word you generally hear between allies. And I asked President Moon, when I spoke to him, about these tweets, about these kind of comments from the US president. Is he concerned about them? And he effectively said, you shouldn't read these tweets too narrowly, and then went on to say that the alliance and the friendship was very strong. Interesting what we're seeing here, though. There was a very traditional welcoming ceremony there, a lot of pomp and ceremony, which we have seen in the past is something potentially the US President Donald Trump enjoys. We've seen it in Saudi Arabia, and certainly we're seeing it here in South Korea as well. The two presidents there meeting. We know that President Moon also broke with tradition and went and welcomed him down at the US military camp Humphreys, just south of Seoul. That's the first time that a South Korean president has met a US president anywhere other than the Blue House. So you can see that the South Korean president here is reaching out. He's making efforts to welcome the US president and to try and make more of a personal relationship with the US president, the same way as we've seen Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in Japan do. Anna?
Paula, as you've been talking, obviously we've seen President Trump exit his vehicle along with his wife Melania, where they've been welcomed by President Moon Jae-in and his wife. As you say, all that pomp and ceremony taking place as we speak. Philip, if I can now bring you into the conversation. We're getting mixed messages from Donald Trump. On the weekend, he said that he's willing to sit down with Kim Jong-un. Yesterday, out of Japan, he said the era for strategic patience is over. And then today, he said that this whole issue will sort itself out. What are we expected to read from all of this?
Well, I think that's part of the issue. We're not really sure. I mean, it's very interesting. We have Koreans coming here, Korean officials asking us what the U.S. policy towards North Korea is. And the funny thing is, we're not really sure. It's from one end where you have Tillerson, who wants to have a conversation, wants to engage, and then you have Donald Trump undercutting him on the other side. So this is an opportunity for the United States and Japan at the highest levels to try to get on the same page. They want to project optically a notion that they're allies, that they're working together. But I do think there are some very clear gaps here that they're going to have to remedy. And I think President Moon, what he's going to do is, I think he will say to Donald Trump, what you're doing in terms of deterrence, making sure that the posture and the deterrence of U.S. forces and Korea forces together will overcome anything that the North Koreans have to throw at them. But at this end, to put more pressure. But I think, as was said earlier, the whole piece that is missing here is dialogue. And that's ultimately what the purpose of all this pressure and defense posturing is all about. So this is what President Moon is going to have to do. And that's something that the South Korean people as a whole want, too.
And if I can ask you, Paula, finally, there's obviously a lot of speculation as to what North Korea will do whilst Donald Trump is here in the region. Some analysts predict that they could perhaps launch another missile test. What are you hearing?
It's certainly possible, Anna. I mean, North Korea could launch a missile at any moment, really. We heard from the South Korean intelligence agency a number of days ago that they saw increased activity of vehicles around one of the missile research facilities in Pyongyang. So certainly everybody knows that they are able to carry out a missile launch at any time. If they do, of course, the question is what kind of range is that missile? What trajectory? Which direction is it facing and launching in? Because all that tells you just how much of a message Pyongyang wants to send. We've heard as well a commentary in Rodong Shinmun, the North Korean state-run newspaper, just today, saying that if the U.S. continues this hostile policy against North Korea and its followers continue this hostile policy, then they will continue with their nuclear development and with their program. So a very clear message from North Korea, what we've been hearing all along, blaming the United States for what they see as a hostile policy, saying that all they are doing is simply trying to defend themselves. Anna.
Yeah, I want to touch on that article that came out of the state media, Philip, if I may. North Korea, as Paula just mentioned, pledged to bolster its nuclear power. It didn't make any reference of Donald Trump's visit to Seoul, but it did, however, mention the 3 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers situated in the waters off the Korean peninsula. What did you make of that statement?
Well, I think what they're doing is that they're putting out a warning that says that they will, if the United States continues to act and continues its policies, particularly with these war exercises. Not only do you have the aircraft carriers, you have a dozen F-35 aircraft that are there, as well as some submarines in the area, that they will respond. Now, the question here is, I think it's just a matter of time that North Korea will probably do another test, probably another kind of less provocative, ICBM test of some kind. I think that's going to happen at some point. The question whether it's going to be as provocative was what they say was an open air test, which I think would go beyond what I think would be considered, just way beyond the pale of reckless. So I think that is something that we have to be aware of, that we have the ability, I think, by our acting in a certain way to prevent that from actually happening. But in terms of whether North Korea does a test or not, I think that inevitably it is a matter of time that they will do one, or both.
Well, Philip Ewan and Paula Hancocks, great to get your insight and perspective. Many thanks for joining us. And as we wrap up that conversation, we see Donald Trump and Moon Jae-in shaking hands with dignitaries, as are the first wives. And they'll be shortly heading into the Blue House, where they will be holding that very important bilateral meeting. Obviously, North Korea at the top of the agenda, but so too the free trade agreement between South Korea and the United States. We'll get back to the Texas church massacre after a very short break with a look at how the shooting is likely to impact gun control in the United States.
Welcome back, everybody. Live pictures from Seoul, South Korea. The time 3:34 in the afternoon, and we can see the US President Donald Trump, who has now moved to the Blue House, the presidential residence there in Seoul, South Korea. The South Korean President Moon Jae-in and Donald Trump are set to talk about a very pressing issue, what to do with North Korea. This is the second stop on a 12-day tour of Asia for Donald Trump. Mr. Trump has already been warmly welcomed with a red carpet welcome reception there in Seoul, but now comes the serious work. They will sit down and discuss exactly what they can do about the growing nuclear threat from North Korea, also the growing missile threat as well. There's the First Lady Melania as well. It appears that they're signing some kind of guest book, making their comments as they arrive at the Blue House for what the South Korean president has described as a historic visit by Mr. Trump, the US president. And we'll continue to follow Donald Trump's visit there to Seoul and what they come up with when it comes to North Korea. But we move on now